Hey everyone, this is Paul Gale from paulgalenetwork.com, and thank you for joining me today for video game sales. It is March 17th, 2022, and in today's video we are going to check out the Japanese hardware and software sales from the week of March 7th through March 13th, 2022. Beginning with hardware. The Nintendo Switch was the #1 best-selling platform of the week, moving 98,246 units. In second place was the PlayStation 5, which sold 16,286 units. Xbox Series came in at third, which did 1,962. The Nintendo 3DS came in at fourth, moving 461 units. And in fifth place was the PlayStation 4, which sold 16 units. A little bit of a deeper dive. Comparison to last week, Nintendo Switch actually went up by 2,000, which is solid. And yet again, year on year, it did a lot better than last year for that same week. Last year for that week, it did 72,000, and this year 98,000. That puts it at 26,000, which is quite a significant percentage of improvement. Now, if you look at the year to date versus last year's year to date, it's a little bit of a different story, but that gap is starting to narrow with this year catching up. This year, Nintendo Switch in Japan has already sold 1,188,000 units. Last year was 1,388,000 units. So there's only a 200,000 unit gap. And part of that can actually be even further reduced because the way that the weeks are, sometimes a week 52 carries over into the first couple of days of a new year, or the week 1 uses the last couple of days of a previous year. So what we have here is a slightly off look of, well, the beginning of last year had more of the 2020 numbers, and the beginning of this year has a little bit less of the 2021 numbers, if that makes sense. Like I said, in that week 52 versus week 1 time frame. So in reality, for what was actually sold in this calendar year versus in the last calendar year, that gap's even a little more narrow. But since we go with this and since it's consistent, 200,000 or less is the gap difference. And I expect that it's going to change pretty soon because Monster Hunter Rise came out last year, which gave a significant boost to Nintendo Switch hardware sales. Comparable in a way to how Animal Crossing was the March big boost of 2020 for Nintendo Switch. However, Kirby and the Forgotten Land comes out at the end of March, which will also, I imagine, give somewhat of a boost to the platform and carry into April. Will 2022 beat out 2021 in terms of hardware overall? Perhaps. We'll see. Software, as I said before, I should say, definitely. Hardware, it could happen. It kind of depends on, honestly, how many Nintendo Switch consoles can Nintendo pump out because of the stock shortage and whatnot, chip manufacturing issues, etc. PlayStation 5, it did, 16,000, which is 9,000, fewer systems out there than the previous week. Unfortunately, more than half of a drop of last year's, but the year to date is comparable, 221,000 versus 228,000 last year. That's only down by 7. And if Sony ups their shipments for the next several weeks, trying to beat what they did from the week prior, and kind of also more importantly in some aspects, last year, before too long, we should see the PS5 besting its 2021 self. Xbox Series managed to do 600 units more than last week and beyond double of what it did last year. So that's pretty solid. Its year to date is a massive 31,000 compared to last year's respective year to date only being 5,000. So good for them. The Nintendo 3DS, a little bit smaller than last year and last week for that matter. The PlayStation 4 just a bit over last week and significantly down from last year. But overall, pretty cool stuff. The PlayStation 5 version that was more valuable to the consumer, perhaps also more available out there in the first place, was the disc version which did 14,000 compared to the wireless, or I should say, discless version, doing only 1,500. The Xbox Series S outperformed the X by 1,500 to only 374, and the Nintendo Switch OLED model on the Nintendo side of things proved to be the most popular and once again perhaps the most shipped and available in the first place, where it did nearly 52,000 with the Nintendo Switch Lite moving 15,000 and Nintendo Switch's base model doing double of the Lite, which was 30,000 in the end. So a pretty cool look at hardware. Overall, strong performance from Nintendo. Fair performance from PlayStation. It did over 10,000, which should be like the bare minimum, as I state multiple times in these videos. And Xbox, it's kind of disappointing a little bit to see that it's under 2, under 4, honestly. I think 5 maybe is a little bit optimistic, but if they could do 5 every week, that would be a great new base for Xbox. Moving on to the software side of things, the number one best-selling game of the week was Pokemon Legends Arceus. In its previous week, it was 5th, but this shows you the staying power of this game. Regardless of it not having 2 versions and not having, online competitive multiplayer battle mechanics, it's still hanging in there. Only a 32% drop from the previous week. Over 2.1 million copies sold physically alone. Very impressive. And it reclaimed its number 1 throne. The PlayStation 4 version of Elden Ring moved from 4th to 2nd place, and it did 30,341 copies. Pretty fair drop too. Honestly, only 45% down from the previous week is quite solid, quite strong, especially for a predominantly single-player game. Gran Turismo 7, the PlayStation 4 version of it, came in at 3rd, and it moved 20,806 copies, had a fairly large 68% drop. In 4th was Triangle Strategy for Nintendo Switch, which fell exactly as I said it would, which was 80% in Japan, at least on the physical side of things, and it dropped to 17,380. But that's not a horrible drop, because it could have been 87, and it's not like 80% is great, but it's within expectation of this type of game. No multiplayer, slightly smaller interest pool in strategy RPGs than typical RPGs, but the game is succeeding for Square Enix because it is quality. And a quality title, regardless of the popularity of the genre that it's behind, should have good enough word of mouth to get more people curious and buy it. So congratulations on surpassing 100,000 physical in Japan officially, with the digital being a decent amount higher. In 5th was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which did 13,038 copies. In 6th was the newly released Chocobo GP for Nintendo Switch, which moved 12,414 copies. In 7th was the Nintendo Switch version of .hack GU Last Recode, and it had a small but decent debut of 11,907 copies sold. In 8th was the PlayStation 5 version of Gran Turismo 7, and that moved 10,106 copies. It dropped 86%, and when you compare that to PS4's 68%, you could see, that was a pretty sizable difference. However, the overall total of both games is more comparable. 85,000 on the PS4 side of things, 83,000 on the PS5 side of things. That's only a couple of thousand difference for the PS4 version being the lead platform. We'll see how it continues in the upcoming weeks. But good to see that it's still on the charts. In 9th was Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, oldie but goodie, moving 9,815 copies. And in 10th was the Nintendo Switch version of Minecraft, neck and neck performance with its last week, this time around doing 9,464 copies sold. The top 10 was made up of 7 Nintendo Switch games, 2 PlayStation 4 games, 1 PlayStation 5 game. And, as with the hardware, everyone's kind of eating. Microsoft not so much, but better than the majority of their Xbox platforms at this point. Also dealing with a chip shortage doesn't really help. PlayStation 5 side of things, not too bad in terms of, what percent of the pie it consumes when it comes to hardware and in software. An overall 7-3 split of Nintendo to games on Sony platforms, not bad. Of course, there's no Xbox presence in the top 10 software wise, but I'm sure that the market is buying more than they did before, because after all, people are buying more Xboxes. So that's reason to believe that more of those people are buying some games for it or subscribing to Xbox's Ultimate Game Pass service. So more popularity overall going to Xbox in Japan, and that's not a bad thing. Thank you for watching today with me. Sometimes I go through the list and then deep dive, and sometimes I do a miniature deep dive as I'm going along the list with each item. That's kind of what I did today, although on the hardware side of things I did later on break down the individual systems, but software, as I read them, I gave a little bit deeper of an analysis. So you'll have to let me know, do you have a preference? Do you like me to run through software completely and then break things down, or kind of like I did today, takes longer to read software initially because I'm filling it in with more feedback as I go on? Either way kind of works, but I always appreciate your feedback. Thanks again. If you celebrate St. Patrick's Day, happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you out there. Wear some green. Here we go. This side. Don't want to get pinched. Don't want the leprechauns to steal your gold either. Maybe share with leprechauns something, Go find some clovers and see if you can make a trade. Maybe they'll give you some gold in exchange for some clovers. That would be pretty sweet. And a happy birthday to my daughter. She is 5 today, so that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to have a fun day. Hope you all have a fun one too. Take it easy, and I'll see you next time for some video game news, video game sales, video game talk, or some trailer watches, or some martial arts tutorial, or something. PGN signing out. Bye. And also, thank you to Chris1964 from the InstallBaseForum.com forums for nicely putting together today's hardware and software charts into what you saw in today's video.